Hi, and welcome back to me reading Sense and Sensibility. This go around, I'm going to try and get through all of Jane Austen's novels that she wrote. And I've been learning so much about Jane Austen and her life. And I also have been learning about like Jane Austen societies and the Jane Austen Society of North America and listening to some podcasts to get me more familiar because it seems like a whole thing. Jane Austen is a whole thing that I just really had no idea about until I started this journey, literally in February of this year. And I've learned so much. And I'm happy to share just this reading. And this book has a very cool, I mean, you can obviously look it up, but a very cool chronology of her works and her life and when she started and what books used to be called. Pride and Prejudice used to be called First Impressions, and then they changed it. I feel like it would be funny if all her books were like Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Honor and Virtue. They all had an and. And this last chapter, this idea of Epicurism came into my awareness, and I don't know, maybe I have heard of it before. And if you kind of Google it, it's like hedonism and only pleasure and not suffering. But seems like it's more than that. And there's a video online that I saw. It was like Epicurism versus Stoicism. And it's like one of the four main philosophical pillars of philosophy, if you will. So go check it out. Go learn some more. Epicurism versus Stoicism, an overview and explanation by this page Vox Stoica. And there was a couple other videos that, you know, I love reading YouTube comments. It's the funniest place to go. If you're ever needing a quick pick-me-up, check out a YouTube video and just look at the comments. It's so funny. But the comments were like, you're really missing the point. Like, if Epicurism was around today and it would be like about nutrition or something, it's like it would still be like the most delicious foods, but minimalist. It's like minimalist pleasure, be around friends. I don't know. It doesn't seem all like hedonism. It doesn't seem like all that. But get into it. It was an interesting little rabbit hole to get into, and philosophy is like Jane Austen. You just learn your whole life. It's like the body. Learning your whole life about the body and still not know much. Let's get back to it. Sense and Sensibility. Marianne's now sick. And also not even wanting to, she just thinks like a good night's sleep is going to help, which sleep does. Sleep cures everything. But Marianne's sick, so I'm a little worried about Marianne, so I do want to keep reading. Chapter 7 of Volume 3 in my book, Chapter 43 for whoever else is listening on. Marianne just went to sleep. Marianne got up the next morning at her usual time, to every inquiry replied that she was better, and tried to prove herself so by engaging in her customary employments. But a day spent in sitting, shivering over the fire with a book in her hand, which she was unable to read, or in lying weary and languid on a sofa, did not speak much in favour of her amendment. And when at last she went early to bed, more and more indisposed. Colonel Brandon was only astonished at his sister's composure, who, though attending and nursing her the whole day against Marianne's inclination, and forcing proper medicines on her at night, trusted, like Marianne, to the certainty and efficacy of sleep, and felt no real alarm. Not looking good, you guys. What's going on? A very restless and feverish night, however, disappointed the expectation of both, and when Marianne, after persisting in rising, confessed herself unable to sit up, and returned voluntarily to her bed, Elinor was very ready to adopt Mrs. Jennings' advice of sending for the Palmers' apothecary. He came, examined the patient, and though encouraging Miss Dashwood to expect that a very few days would restore her sister to health, yet by pronouncing her disorder to have a putrid tendency. Why is that in the back? What does that mean? A putrid tendency tending towards infection through decomposition, rotting of organic matter. What is, she's just decomposing from the inside out? Grief will do some crazy things to you, babe. Grief will do some crazy things to y'all, babes. Yikes. Okay, so she's dying from the inside out. She has a putrid tendency. And allowing the word infection to pass his lips gave instant alarm to Mrs. Palmer on her baby's account. Right, she doesn't want to infect her baby with anything. Good call, Mrs. Palmer. Yeah, duh. Mrs. Jennings, who had been inclined from the first to think Marianne's complaint more serious than Eleanor, now looked very grave on Mr. Harris's report, and confirming Charlotte's fears and caution, urged the necessity of her immediate removal with her infant, and Mr. Palmer, though treating their apprehensions as idle, found the anxiety and importunity of his wife too great to be withstood. Her departure, therefore, was fixed on, and within an hour after Mr. Hamill's arrival, she set off, with her little boy and his nurse, for the house of a near relation of Mr. Palmer's, who lived a few miles on the other side of Bath, whither her husband promised, at her earnest entreaty, to join her in a day or two, and whither she was almost equally urgent with her mother to accompany her. Mrs. Jennings, however, with a kindness of heart which made Eleanor really love her, declared her resolution of not stirring from Cleveland as long as Marianne remained ill. Oh, she wants to stay and take care of Marianne. And of endeavouring by her own attentive care to supply her the place of the mother she had taken from her. And Eleanor found her on every occasion a most willing and active helpmate. Helpmate. Desirous to share in all her fatigues, and often by her better experience in nursing of material use. Poor Marianne, languid and low from the nature of her malady. Of her malady, right? And feeling herself universally ill, could no longer hope that tomorrow would find her recovered, and the idea of what tomorrow would have procured, but for this unlucky illness, made every ailment more severe. For on that day they were to have begun their journey home, and attended the whole way by a servant of Mrs. Jennings, were to have taken their mother by surprise on the following forenoon. They were going to surprise their mum. It is the worst to be sick. The little that she said was all a lamentation of this inevitable delay, though Eleanor tried to raise her spirits and make her believe, as she then really believed herself, that it would be a very short one. The next day produced little or no alteration in the state of the patient. She certainly was not better, and except that there was no amendment, did not appear worse. Their party was now farther reduced. For Mr. Palmer, though very unwilling to go, as well from real humanity and good nature, as from a dislike of appearing to be frightened away by his wife, was persuaded at last by Colonel Brandon to perform his promise of following her. And while he was preparing to go, Colonel Brandon himself, with a much greater exertion, began to talk of going likewise. He said, maybe I should go too. Here, however, the kindness of Mrs. Jennings interposed most acceptably. For to send the colonel away while his love was in a much uneasiness on his sister's account would be to deprive them both, she thought, of every comfort, and therefore telling him at once that his stay at Cleveland was necessary to herself, that she should want him to stay and to play piquet of an evening. I think that's a card game, but it's in the back and I want to read it. A card game of 2 players using 32 cards. All cards below 7 are discarded from the pack. Oh, all the cards below 7 are discarded from the pack. I wonder if there's like a Regency era card game tutor? Or like come learn Regency era card games? You might have to go to England for that, probably, huh? What was going on in America at the time after this revolution? Nothing good. Nobody's playing cards over there, I'll tell you that. Bill the Butcher's decapitating people. Piquet, it was a Cleveland, she wanted him to play at Piquet. Or Piquet? I forgot how to say that. Of an evening, while Miss Dashwood was above with her sister. etc. She urged him so strongly to remain that he, who was gratifying the first wish of his own heart by a compliance, could not long even affect to demur. Especially at Mrs. Jennings' entreaty was warmly seconded by Mr. Palmer, who seemed to feel a relief to himself in leaving behind him a person so well able to assist or advise Miss Dashwood in any emergency. Somebody. Marianne was, of course, kept in ignorance of all these arrangements. She knew not that she had been the means of sending the owners of Cleveland away, in about 7 days from the time of their arrival. It gave to her no surprise that she saw nothing of Mrs. Palmer, and as it gave her likewise no concern, she never mentioned her name. 2 days passed away from the time of Mr. Palmer's departure, and his situation continued, with little variation, the same. Mr. Harris, who attended her every day, still talked boldly of a speedy recovery, and Miss Dashwood was equally sanguine. But the expectation of the others was by no means so cheerful. Mrs. Jennings had determined very early in the seizure that Marianne would never get over it. And Colonel Brandon, who was chiefly of use in listening to Mrs. Jennings' forebodings, was not in a state of mind to resist their influence. He tried to reason himself out of fears, which the different judgment of an apothecary seemed to render absurd. But the many hours of each day in which he was left entirely alone were but too favourable for the admission of every melancholy idea, and he could not expel from his mind the persuasion that he should see Marianne no more. I'm like rocking back and forth in my chair, like, what's going to happen? On the morning of the third day, however, the gloomy anticipations of both were almost done away, for when Mr. Harris arrived, he declared his patient materially better. Okay. Her pulse was much stronger. He's doing acupuncture. He's checking pulses. He's doing a little Reiki. He's giving her little drops of flower essences. They're doing a little seance over her. They've done an exorcism. He's done it all, and she's actually better. So her pulse was much stronger, and every symptom more favorable than on the preceding visit. This is great. Elinor confirmed in every pleasant hope with all cheerfulness, rejoicing that in her letters to her mother she had pursued her own judgment rather than her friends, and making very light of the indisposition which delayed them at Cleveland, and almost fixing on a time when Marianne would be able to travel. But the day did not close so auspiciously as it began. Towards the evening, Marianne became ill again, growing more heavy, restless, and uncomfortable than before. Her sister, however, still sanguine, was willing to attribute the change to nothing more than the fatigue of having sat up to have a bed made. Carefully administering the cordials prescribed, saw her with satisfaction sink at last into a slumber, from which she expected the most beneficial effects. Her sleep, though not so quiet as Elinor wished to see it, lasted a considerable time, and anxious to observe the results of it herself, she resolved to sit with her during the whole of it. Mrs. Jennings, knowing nothing of any change in the patient, went unusually early to bed. Her maid, who was one of the principal nurses, was recreating herself in the housekeeper's room, and Elinor remained alone with Marianne. The repose of the latter became more and more disturbed, and his sister, who watched with unremitting attention her continual change of posture, and heard the frequent but inarticulate sounds of complaint which passed her lips, was almost wishing to rouse her from so painful a slumber, when Marianne, suddenly awakened by some accidental noise in the house, started hastily up, and with feverish wildness cried out, "Is Mamma coming?" "Not yet," replied the other, concealing her terror and assisting Marianne to lie down again. "But she will be here, I hope, before it is long. It is a great way, you know, from hence to Barton." "But she must not go round by London," cried Marianne in the same hurried manner. "I shall never see her if she goes by London." Elinor perceived with alarm that she was not quite herself. Oh, my God. And while attempting to soothe her, eagerly felt her pulse. It was lower and quicker than ever, and Marianne still talking wildly of Mamma, her alarm increased so rapidly as to determine her on sending instantly for Mr. Harris, and dispatching a messenger to Barton for her mother, to consult with Colonel Brandon on the best means of effecting the latter, was as thought which immediately followed the resolution of its performance. And as soon she had rung up the maid to take her place by his sister, she hastened down to the dining room, where she knew he was generally to be found at a much later hour than the present. It was no time for hesitation. Her fear and her difficulties were immediately before him. Her fears he had no courage, no confidence to attempt the removal of. He listened to them in silent despondence, but her difficulties were instantly obviated. For with a readiness that seemed to speak the occasion, and the service prearranged in his mind, he offered himself as a messenger who should fetch Mrs. Dashwood. Elinor made no resistance that was not easily overcome. She thanked him with brief though fervent gratitude, and while he went to hurry off his servant with a message to Mr. Harris and an order for post horses directly, she wrote a few lines to her mother. You guys, this is not good. Okay. The comfort of such a friend at that moment as Colonel Brandon, of such a companion for her mother, how gratefully was it felt. A companion whose judgment would guide, whose attendance must relieve, and whose friendship might soothe her. As far as the shock of such a summons could be lessened to her, his presence, his manner, his assistance would lessen it. He, meanwhile, whatever he might feel, acted with all the firmness of a collected mind, made every necessary arrangement with the utmost dispatch, and calculated with exactness the time in which she might look for his return. Not a moment was lost in delay of any kind. The horses arrived even before they were expected, and Colonel Brandon, only pressing her hand with a look of solemnity, and a few words spoken too low to reach her ear, hurried into the carriage. It was then about 12 o'clock, and she returned to her sister's apartment to wait for the arrival of the apothecary, and to watch by her the rest of the night. It was a night of almost equal suffering to both. Hour after hour passed away in sleepless pain and delirium on Marianne's side, and in the most cruel anxiety on Elinor's, before Mr. Harris appeared. Her apprehensions once raised, paid by their excess for all her former security, and the servant who sat up with her, for she would not allow Mrs. Jennings to be called, only tortured her by hints of what her mistress had always thought. Marianne's ideas were still, at intervals, fixed incoherently on her mother, and whenever she mentioned her name, it gave a pang to the heart of poor Elinor, who reproached herself for having trifled with so many days of illness, and wretched for some immediate relief, fancied that all relief might soon be in vain, that everything had been delayed too long, and pictured to herself her suffering mother arriving too late to see this darling child or to see her rational. It's so hard to know what to do when somebody's sick. Is it a virus? Is it bacterial? Do you just sit and wait? If it's a virus, it's going to clear itself out. You can't really do anything. If it's bacterial, you're infecting everybody. Everybody needs to go. What do? Nobody knows what to do. And they just have an apothecary? Oh my God. She was on the point of sending again for Mr. Harris, or if he could not come, for some other advice, when the former, but not till after 5 o'clock, arrived. His opinion, however, made some little amends for his delay, for though acknowledging a very unexpected and unpleasant alteration in his patient, he would not allow the danger to be material, and talked of the relief with a fresh mode of treatment must procure, with a confidence which, in a lesser degree, was communicated to Elinor. He promised to call again in the course of 3 or 4 hours, and left both the patient and her anxious attendant more composed than he found him. Then he had found them. Okay. With strong concern, and with many reproaches for not being called to their aid, did Mrs. Jennings hear in the morning of what had passed. Her former apprehensions, now with greater reason restored, left her no doubt of the event, and though trying to speak comfort to Elinor, Eleanor, Eleanor. Her conviction of her sister's danger would not allow her to offer the comfort of hope. Her heart was really grieved. The rapid decay, the early depth of a girl so young, so lovely as Marianne, must have struck a less interested person with concern. On Mrs. Jennings' compassion, she had other claims. She had been for 3 months her companion, was still under her care, and she was known to have been greatly injured and long unhappy. The distress of her sister, too, particularly a favourite, was before her, and as for their mother, when Mrs. Jennings considered that Marianne might probably be to her what Charlotte was to herself, her sympathy in her sufferings was very sincere. Mr. Harris was punctual in his second visit, but he came to be disappointed in his hopes of what the last would produce. His medicines had failed. The fever was unabated. And Marianne only more quiet, not more herself, remained in a heavy stupor. Eleanor, catching all, and more than all, his fears in a moment, proposed to call in farther advice, but he judged it unnecessary. He had still something more to try, some fresh application, of whose success he was almost as confident as the last, and his visit concluded with encouraging assurances which reached the ear, but could not enter the heart of Miss Dashwood. She was calm, except when she thought of her mother, but she was almost hopeless, and in the state she continued till noon, scarcely stirring an inch from her sister's bed, her thoughts wandering from one image of grief, one suffering friend to another, and her spirits oppressed to the utmost by the conversation of Mrs. Jennings, who scrupled not to attribute the severity and danger of this attack to the many weeks of previous indisposition which Marianne's disappointment had brought on. Right. Eleanor felt all the reasonableness of this idea, and it gave fresh misery to her reflections. About noon, however, she began with a caution, a dread of disappointment, which for some time kept her silent, even to her friend, to fancy, to hope she could perceive a slight amendment in her sister's pulse. She waited, watched, and examined it again and again. And at last, with an agitation more difficult to bury under exterior calmness than all her foregoing distress, ventured to communicate her hopes. Mrs. Jennings, though forced on examination to acknowledge a temporary revival, tried to keep her young friend from indulging a thought of its continuance. And Eleanor, conning over every injunction of distrust, told herself likewise not to hope, but it was too late. Hope had already entered, and the feeling... hope had already entered. Oh, good. And feeling all its anxious flutter, she bent over her sister to watch. She hardly knew what for what. Half an hour passed away, and the favourable symptom yet blessed her. Others even arose to confirm it. Her breath, her skin, her lips, all flattered Eleanor with signs of amendment, and Marianne fixed her eyes on her with a rational, though languid gaze. Anxiety and hope now oppressed her in equal degrees, and left her no moment of tranquillity till the arrival of Mr. Harris at 4 o'clock, when his assurances, his felicitations on a recovery in his sister even surpassing his expectation, gave her confidence, comforts, and tears of joy. Jane, that was tense. Marianne was in every respect materially better, and he declared her entirely out of danger. Mrs. Jennings, perhaps satisfied with the partial justification of her forebodings, which had been found in their late alarm, allowed herself to trust in his judgment, and admitted with unfeigned joy, and soon with unequivocal cheerfulness, that the probability of an entire recovery. Eleanor could not be cheerful. Her joy was of a different kind, and led to anything rather than gaiety. Marianne, restored to life, health, friends, and to her doting mother, was an idea to fill her head with sensations of exquisite comfort, and expand it in fervent gratitude. But it led to no outward demonstrations of joy, no words, no smiles. All with Eleanor's breast was satisfaction, silent and strong. She continued by the side of her sister with little intermission the whole afternoon, calming every fear, satisfying every inquiry of her unfeebled spirits, supplying every succor. Succor. Whoa, what? Relief. Also aid and help. Something that furnishes relief.
U.S. Succor.
Succor. Okay. Don't think too hard about it. Don't think too much about it. Supplying every succor and watching almost every look and every breath. The possibility of relapse would, of course, in some moments occur to remind her of what anxiety was. Remember what anxiety is. Okay. But when she saw on a frequent and minute examination that every symptom of recovery continued, and saw Marianne at 6 o'clock sink into a quiet, steady, and to all appearance comfortable sleep, she silenced every doubt. Okay, we're back. The time was now drawing on when Colonel Brandon might be expected back. At 10 o'clock, she trusted, or at least not much later, her mother would be relieved from the dreadful suspense in which she must now be travelling towards them. The colonel, too, perhaps scarcely less an object of pity. Oh, how slow the progress of time which kept them in ignorance! At 7 o'clock, leaving Marianne still sweetly asleep, she joined Mrs. Jennings in the drawing-room to tea. Of breakfast she had been kept by her fears, and of dinner by their sudden reverse from eating much, and the present refreshment, therefore, with such feeling of content as she brought to it, was particularly welcome. Mrs. Jennings would have persuaded her, as its conclusion, to take some rest before her mother's arrival, and allow her to take her place by Marianne, but Elinor had no sense of fatigue, no capability of sleep at that moment about her, and she was not going to be kept away from her sister an unnecessary instant. Mrs. Jennings, therefore, attending her upstairs into the sick chamber, join me in the sick bay, to satisfy herself that all continued right, left her there again to her charge and her thoughts, and retired to her own room to write letters and sleep. The night was cold and stormy. The wind roared around the house, and the rain beat against the windows, but Elinor, all happiness within, regarded it not. Marianne slept through every blast, and the travellers, they had a rich reward in store for every present inconvenience. Yeah, because they're traveling in this crazy weather. The clock struck 8. Had it been 10, Elinor would have been convinced that at every moment she heard a carriage driving up to the house, and so strong was the persuasion that she did, in spite of the almost impossibility of their being already come, that she moved into the adjoining dressing closet and opened a window shutter to be satisfied of the truth. She instantly saw that her ears had not deceived her. The flaring lamps of a carriage were immediately in view. By their uncertain light she thought she could discern it to be drawn by 4 horses, and this, while it told the excess of her poor mother's alarm, gave some explanation to such unexpected rapidity. She said, "Put 12 horses, because we need to get there quick." Never in her life had Elinor found it so difficult to be calm as at that moment. You just want to be like, ooh, like a puppy dog, like, they're here. The knowledge of what her mother must be feeling as the carriage stopped at the door, of her doubt, her dread, perhaps her despair, and of what she had to tell. With such knowledge it was impossible to be calm. Calm. All that remained to be done was to be speedy, and therefore, staying only until she could leave Mrs. Jennings' maid with her sister, she hurried downstairs. The bustle in the vestibule, as she passed along an inner lobby, assured her that they were already in the house. She rushed forward toward the drawing-room. She entered it, and saw only Willoughby. What? Ain't nobody want to see you, Willoughby. What? Oh my god. This book is so good. That's literally the last sentence of that chapter. We literally have to wait for me to make a whole nother video to find out, and only saw Willoughby at the end of the chapter. Oh my god, I want to keep going, but we're gonna have to wait for next time. Oh my god, I can't believe it. I thought it was his mom. He brought 4 horses? Okay. Jane, you dirty dog. Join me next time to see what Willoughby has to say for himself about her 666 sister with grief from your ass, Willoughby. I'm pissed. I can't believe Willie B showed up. Oh my god, okay. This is why we read, because this is so much fun. Happy reading, everybody, and ta-ta for now.